Well, something I want to say first, I forgot to mention this earlier. In the beginning of the video, we did mention me and Mahmoud. We do not identify as conservative Muslims. We both identify as just Muslim. That's something that they cut out, obviously, because the title of the video is conservative Muslim versus liberal Muslims, so they need to keep that in. Um, but yeah, we said there's no such thing as either, right? There's no conservative Muslim, there's no liberal Muslim. You're just a Muslim.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another video, but this video is really different. This is actually a response video to a video by Jubilee. And Jubilee is a purely entertainment YouTube channel. And recently they got a bunch of conservative and liberal Muslims together to debate or to talk about or discuss about homosexuality in Islam and hijab in Islam and all those type of topics, kind of like reforming Islam and things like that. And what's special about this video that you're going to watch, this response video, is that we have Mahmoud and JAD from the original Jubilee video on board in this video. And another treat is that we have Shaykh MUSTAFA UMAR, a mainstream scholar in Islam, who we will be interviewing to discuss these points more in depth. And I apologize for my sloppy editing. I'm not an editor. It's very hard to edit videos, and especially this video, because it's very hard to organize everyone's thoughts and kind of present them properly. And that's why you'll see a bunch of like horrible transitions and cuts and things like that. So please bear with me on that. And the cool thing about Sheikh Mustafa Umar, which is a mainstream scholar, is that he is very well traditionally learned, and he has certification to teach in all the topics that he's going to be talking about. And also he founded an Islamic school here in California, and also he is a resident scholar and imam for a community in Irvine, and he's been doing this for over 2 decades now. So we're very happy to have him, and we're very happy for you to listen to him as well.
Yeah, so I think it was a first off, I'll say it was a really cool experience. Alhamdulillah, I really enjoyed it. Obviously, I met Mahmoud, which was awesome. Um, it was cool. I got to go out to LA for my first time. It was nice going to that city. It was cool. Some very unique people over there. Um, but Jubilee in itself, yeah, I think they did. For me personally, I don't really have many complaints. Like I said, obviously in the video, I think Jubilee is more of a liberal channel, so they're gonna do their best to. I wouldn't say they made it unfair, but they did obviously like focus a lot on Natalie and what her beliefs were, and I think she aligned her beliefs aligned with a lot of Jubilee's beliefs as well, right? So I think it was just yeah, they put a lot of her parts in there, and there was a lot of focus on her, which me personally, I really don't have a problem with, as long as I feel like we were able to get our points across, and the major points were stayed in the video, so I was okay with that.
A good Muslim woman wears a hijab.
So I think that one of the main reasons why I disagreed is because of the statement, a good Muslim woman. And I think that you can be a bad Muslim woman as well and wear the hijab. And then also the hijab is not just limited to the headscarf. It's how you dress and how you carry yourself as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess for me, in how I've read the Quran, the translation that I have, the word isn't required, it should. That women should cover their heads and cover their chest.
So how can a bad Muslim woman also wear the hijab? How does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I kind of said it. We said it before. You know, maybe she's not doing the obligatory salah. She's not fasting. She's not doing the main things in Islam that makes you a Muslim. You know, obviously, hijab is obligatory as well for Muslim women. But if you're not doing the other fara'id, then you can be considered a bad Muslim.
I think one of the things is a lot of the Muslims of our generation, I would say the Muslim women, I think they were forced to wear the hijab by their parents, right? So it wasn't really their decision. And when something is forced upon you, you kind of have the tendency just to like rebel, and it's not something like you really are doing like because of your opinion. It's not their choice essentially, right? So just because they're wearing the hijab, that might not have been their decision, and because it wasn't their decision, that means that they don't understand the value of wearing it and why they must wear it. So maybe they don't do their 5 daily prayers, or maybe they don't have the right akhlaq, or maybe they don't carry themselves like a proper Muslim woman. So that's why it's possible that a Muslim woman wears a hijab yet she lacks in her faith. You reminded me, me and Mahmoud in the actual video, we talked about the whole, they cut it out, the whole thing out, but we talked about men having a hijab as well and having to cover certain parts of their body. And the way that they have to handle themselves, but none of that was included. We did talk about how men also they have their own aura, and they have to carry themselves in the right manner with modesty, and that's something that we went into detail with in the video, but they cut it out, so no worries.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess for me, in how I've read the Quran, the translation that I have, the word isn't required, it should. That women should cover their heads and cover their chest.
So I mean, it's sad to see that, this. It was so funny to see. It's like, I read a translation of the Quran, and the word said should. So I mean, maybe if it said, and she almost admitted to say, like, if it said like must, then I probably would have accepted it. It's like the level of um, acceptance for such low standards is really shocking. It's like, one person translated it with the word should. And if you look at the Arabic is like li, which is lam al-amr. Lam al-amr means it's the lam, the letter lam of command. So it actually indicates a command. It's like, you must do this. Anyone who has the most basic understanding of Arabic knows this. And you don't need to know Arabic. The reason why when you translate the word, sometimes you translate it as must, sometimes you translate it as should, but the meaning should could be must, or it could be optional. You have to know in English, it's a vague word. If you ask the translator of the Quran who actually used the word should, they might have actually said, hey, you know what? My intention when I wrote should actually meant must, because that's the way you translate these words, right? Without putting your own spin on it. So it's very surprising just to see that. And I just wanted to clarify that for people who are going to read like an English translation of the Quran. If you're stuck with that and you don't have Arabic, at least look through like 10 or 20 different translations and try to understand that, hey, you know what? Someone picked this word this way, someone picked another word this way, because they were trying to represent something in the Arabic which is ambiguous when you translate it into English. Even if you don't know Arabic, you could probably figure out some of these things, or you could just go and check with anyone who just knows the Arabic language. Even someone who doesn't believe, you can even check with a non-Muslim, who knows the Arabic language, if you think that they're being biased, and say, what does this word linguistically mean? And you'd be able to get the answer.
Acting on homosexuality is a sin.
I believe that acting on homosexuality is a sin, especially like if you were expressing sexual desire, because that should take place between a man and a woman under the sanction of marriage. So that is the reason why I do feel as though it is a sin.
For instance, in America or in the West, homosexuality 30 years ago wasn't accepted, or 40, 50 years ago. But now it's acceptable. The subjective morality, it just shifts. It shifts based on the time. We don't shift in our religion.
So in the video, Mahmoud had a good answer to every single question, right? And so did I. I mean, alhamdulillah, we both answered all the questions, right? But they didn't keep everything in there. So obviously they have to make sure that it's equally spread out throughout the video, and like they're showing everybody and they're making it equal. But it was a little bit frustrating to see that they cut out a lot of I would say like Mahmoud's tangents because he would just he would tell them the information, but during the shoot, they're just like, yeah, Mahmoud, you got to cut it down a little bit, just because it was a little bit long. But the information that he was giving was necessary, right? It's a little bit difficult to squeeze into a 30-minute video, or not even 20 minute. But yes, obviously we believe acting on homosexuality is a sin, and later in the video you'll see I talk about how it's just like Mahmoud said, it's a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Read Homosexuality in Islam by Dr. Siraj Al-Haq. Keisha Ali also talks about this. These are both two contemporary scholars.
Later, I was invited to participate in a book project. That was the Progressive Muslims book. And, this book is not going to be complete. It's on gender, justice, and pluralism. There needs to be something there on homosexuality. You need to write this. And I backed away from that challenge for a very long time because I hadn't gotten tenure yet. As Summer brought up, there are challenges within the academy to writing on these topics, and one has to be very strategic about how to approach it. However, doing a study and publishing it is a struggle, is a different struggle. So we had to deal with publishers, and I found that the publisher was very interested in the theological part because it was kind of sexy. Many people wanted to read about sort of queering Islamic theology, and a publisher took that part of the study up as a book. which came out as Homosexuality in Islam.
And Scott Kugel, he's an academic, just a general religious studies department, and he wrote a book trying to prove that homosexuality in Islam, like there's nothing wrong with it. First of all, the guy doesn't really have any background in Islamic studies. This is not really his field. He's not a recognized scholar. He's not peer reviewed in the field. No Islamic studies scholars actually, consider him to be an authority on anything. And there's like a 40 page refutation already written against his book, very detailed, by Brother Mubin Vaid. You can find it on Muslim Matters. And he's pretty much responded to all of the pretty flimsy arguments that he makes in the book anyways. So pretty much no one recognizes this today. Anyone can write a book. That's just the reality of it. And you don't even have to be first of all, he's not in the Islamic studies department, but even if he was, you could still write a book. So you could write a book, you're going to get published. There's a massive LGBT pro LGBT agenda, and people want to put a lot of money into publishing books like that. And that's just really one of the reasons why this movement of rethinking what they call progressive Islam has just become dominant. So that's pretty much Scott Kugel and where he stands. He doesn't really have any specific training in the field of Islamic studies. He doesn't have recognition from any of the scholars that are recognized by 2 billion Muslims in the world. So that's him. The other one is Keisha Ali. Keisha Ali is an academic, and she's trying to basically reinterpret Islam according to the feminist lens, or the feminist worldview, right? And that the problem with all these isms. Right, there's been Marxists who try to reinterpret Islam according to Marxism. Feminists who try to reinterpret Islam according to feminism. There are capitalists who are trying to reinterpret according to capitalism. Any type of ism that you come along and you try to bring like your own worldview, and you say we're going to make Islam fit into this mold, into this idea that I already have. It's almost like a religion for people, and they want Islam to fit into that other religion. Well, I mean, that's not the way you're supposed to authentically approach any religion, let alone Islam, right? You're supposed to leave your own biases aside. You're supposed to try to be as objective as possible, and you're supposed to try to understand the Quran for what it is, not taking your own ideas and imposing it upon the Quran. That's just a disingenuous way to try to approach any religion. We don't do that with the Constitution. We don't do that with any document. We don't do that with history. We don't do that with medicine. You don't go to like a surgeon and be like, you know what, I think, my shoulder is hurting. So therefore, I don't want you to look at my neck. It's only my shoulder. It's like, you go to specialists. People have been spending their entire life like studying how the body works and how it functions. And then somebody else comes along and says, well, my view is something different. Even though I don't have any training in the field, even though this is not my area of specialties, I'm just going to go ahead and say something anyways.
So there's a couple different points that you said that I want to rebuttal and respond to. So the first one being that you said being homosexual, being bisexual, all of those things is a sin. First of all, that's incorrect. Being any of those things in itself is not a sin. So that's why when the Prophet is acting on homosexuality, that is the sin. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. He does not burden a soul with anything more than it can take. As a Muslim, you believe that, like you just said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us all, and He created homosexual people with those people with those tendencies for a reason. But at the same time, this whole life is a test, right?
Yep.
And for the person who has those tendencies, then that's an extremely difficult test that they're going to have to go on with for the rest of their lives.
But that's an assumption that is the only test. What if the test is living in a world that hates you, that thinks that you cannot act on a desire of love, of consensual love, but still being committed to Allah?
So I mean, it's just a very warped understanding of the world. So if we're assuming that, all the Muslims throughout history, all of them have just been completely misguided on this issue. Nobody could have figured out what she has supposedly figured out on her own, right? And a few small group of people, without having any expertise, without even knowing the Arabic language, by reading a translation and looking at the word should versus must, and like not even translating that correctly. That she's misunderstanding the test. If everyone was a bunch of corrupt, hypocritical, foolish people who didn't understand the Quran, then we could say, okay, you know what, her test is to fight back against them, right? If there's a corrupt scholar or a few corrupt scholars or intellectuals in your community, yeah, your test is to fight against them, but your test is to also ascertain whether are they the ones that are deluded and misguided, or are you the one who's in that boat, right? And one simple litmus test that we've been taught in Islam is you look at what the entire Muslim ummah, the entire universal Muslim community throughout 1400 years, what have they been saying? If you think that you've discovered something new and 1400 years nobody else could have figured it out, despite so much research, so much evidence, and the amount of effort you've put in to actually research this issue is so minimal, it's almost non-existent relative to everyone else. You just got to question your intention and say, hey, am I really that of a genius? Am I that smart? Am I such a genius that like I figured this out without even much effort, and like people put in their entire lives, and we're not talking about just people, we're talking about over a billion people, right? Over a billion people throughout history, millions of scholars put in their entire life, and not a single person could have figured out what I figured out. And I didn't. There's no new invention. There's no new technology that came out. There's no new science that came out. There's no new gay gene that has been discovered. Nothing has changed. I just somehow figured it out. I think someone who's in that position really needs to just question their intention and say, that really doesn't seem like you taking on the whole world and the whole Muslim ummah. That doesn't seem like that's probably your test. Your test is probably the other way around.
To have respect for Professor Kugel, he did like in his biography, he did have like at least 10 years of like studying overseas and things like that. What's the difference between that and having a person study Islam traditionally through other types of teachers?
Right. So I mean, the thing is, look, people can study. It's important to have like a good teachers, good schools, and there's this idea of peer review, right? So this concept exists in every single field. It exists in medicine, it exists in history, it exists in the social sciences. Is that you have specialists in the same field who are basically validating your work, right? So this idea of peer review, there's a few systems that have been developed along the way. One of them is known as the Ijaza system. The Ijaza system is basically where you study with teachers and you study certain texts, and you say, you know what, this teacher has studied from another teacher who's qualified in the text, who studied from another teacher. And there's like a chain of tradition that's going back to people who have really known to be experts across the board. That's one method. The second method is, you get a bunch of scholars together and they peer review each other's ideas and the materials, and they publish and they write, and they even when they disagree, they can still respect the person or respect their opinion even if they disagree. Professor Kugel is not in that field, right? He's not sitting among those scholars. He's not verified by anyone. His writings are not being peer reviewed by any of those people who are basically speaking on behalf of Islam as Muslims, the 2 billion Muslims that exist. You have so many Islamic universities across the world. You have so many research think tanks, scholars, engaging in this process, and they have a level of respect for each other. He's not in that network in any way, shape, or form. So even if somebody has some credentials from Western University, or they took a few classes here or a few classes there, that doesn't make them an accredited or an approved scholar. That's actually someone you can recognize and trust as being a genuine, authentic source of Islam.
So his book on homosexuality, you're saying it's not peer reviewed?
No, it's not been peer reviewed by any scholars. It's been criticized by scholars. So, like I said, Mubin Vaid and others have actually looked at the book and they said this has no basis in Islam whatsoever, right? So, it's, for example, someone can write a book on Islam. I mean, there can be a scholar, there can be a person who studied and took a bunch of Islamic classes. They have a PhD in Islamic studies somewhere, and they write a book about, I'm going to write about why I think alcohol is allowed in Islam. They can do that, and you can write a book, right? Doesn't mean the book is being peer reviewed. It's going to be accepted by scholars. It's going to be accepted by Muslims. It doesn't mean the argument is strong in any way, but it can still get published. You'd be like, this is a drunk's guide to, reinterpreting Islam, and saying that as long as I don't drink alcohol, as long as I don't, as long as I'm not drunk when I'm praying, everything's okay. The people misunderstood what the verses said. There are many Muslims who do that, and there may be a few people who have studied, taken some classes and stuff, and they also are incentivized, or for whatever reasons they go ahead and do that. That doesn't make it another opinion within the religion of Islam, right? That's not the way that it works. There's scholarly opinions of people who have really put in proper research. They've studied with the right sources, and then they have a circle of students and people of knowledge who accept their opinion. And you say, "Oh, this is another opinion, on some issue." That's not the case when it comes to homosexuality.
The Quran must be reinterpreted for the 21st century.
In the simplest form, I just believe that the Quran is like a sacred text, and sacred text as a whole just should not be touched. When I think about reinterpretations, I almost think about like amendments in a way. If we believe that the Prophet, peace be unto him, is the last and final messenger, then whatever he was revealed to him, it is that.
You can't reinterpret everything, because the second you open up one thing for reinterpretation, you're opening up the whole religion for reinterpretation.
So there's this like recent phenomenon of like, like for example, this channel, it's more of like a liberal channel that interviewed the Muslims, and they kind of like gave a lot of talking time to like the queer identity, Muslim identity on their channel, because obviously they're trying to promote that, right? But I noticed also a lot of like news stations, for example, or like media outlets, they're really asking or begging the question like, why hasn't Islam reformed yet? Or what does that mean? Why are Westerners so like on edge to push us to reform? And what is that like? Do we have to reform? Does Islam have to reform? Or what are they even talking about reforming Islam?
So I think there's a number of issues. One of them is, many people, they come from Christian backgrounds, or they're still somewhat Christian. And because Christianity went through its reformation, basically, it went through this reinterpretation away from the text of the Bible. And when they look back and they're like, well, what Christianity was during the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages and the Catholic Church and all of that, they're like, that was horrible, and we don't accept that. So we want the Muslims to follow the same path. They're automatically projecting their own issues that they had with their own religion onto Muslims, and they may be like, you guys need to do the same thing that we did with your Quran, the way that we did it with the Bible. So that's one thing, right? The second thing is their current interpretations, usually like secular liberal ways of looking at things and looking at morality, looking at the world. It's a very this is the absolute truth for them. It's ironic because they believe in the relativity of truth, but at the moment right now, what they've currently reached at right now, they're like, well, this is correct and everything else is oppressive and it's wrong and it's backwards and all of that stuff. And if the Muslims are not in line with where we currently are in our current modern or postmodern formulation of moral values, then they're completely wrong. So they need to reform, and they need to basically catch up and get to where we are in terms of thinking about things from human sexuality and politics and military and all of the issues. So basically, it's like, if you're not on board with us, you're still in the backwards thing. So they're hoping that Islam is going to somehow align with modern secular liberal values, like exactly. And that's what they mean by like, they're hoping for a reformation or rethinking or reprocessing or something like that. And as to the question is, do we need that? The answer is no, we don't need to change our book. We don't need to change the religion of Islam. On some things where there is room for some level of difference of opinion, maybe there's a preference for one opinion over another. Maybe one opinion kind of leads to one conclusion, or leads to, doesn't lead to a different conclusion, or whatever it may be. But that is completely different from what we're saying about reformation, meaning that we're going to modify the text and we're going to take the things where there is no room for, there's no ambiguity, there's no vagueness, the text is super clear, but we're going to try and spin it around and give it a different twist. That's usually what reformation is referring to. And no, Islam is not in need of that, because just like what was mentioned in the video, if if we believe, it's kind of contradictory. If you believe that the Quran is from God, which is what we believe, and that God knows everything and he knows the current and he knows the future, whatever he gave us, he knew that circumstances are going to change. He knew that people's moral tendencies, are going to change. But he would have given us something that is timeless, something that we can actually follow, because the Quran is intended to be a book of guidance for all times. So it would be self-contradictory to say that, God revealed something for all times, but then the time changed and it doesn't apply anymore. That just wouldn't make sense anymore, and that would become self-contradictory, and it'd be very hard for someone to maintain their understanding, basic understanding of Islam and understanding of Allah, if they were to hold that belief.
Once we start diving in and wanting whatever we want, it just, where does it end at that point?
Exactly.
When is it gonna come to incest next? For instance, in America or in the West, homosexuality 30 years ago wasn't accepted, or 40, 50 years ago, but now it's acceptable. This is the liberal ideal, right? The subjective morality, it just shifts. Exactly. It shifts based on the time. We don't shift.
Following your subjective laws or moral order is ironic in the sense that, like, you're forcing your subjective opinion, and they actually believe that our opinion is also subjective. If you're in that paradigm, it's ironic. Can you touch up on that? Because that's what Muhammad was trying to explain. But I think you can explain further.
Yeah. So I mean, this idea is that this concept of morals change over time, right? And for example, the idea of what is moral in terms of sexuality is constantly in flux, particularly in what we call Western civilization. So for them to say at any point in time that everyone else needs to align with our perception of things, it's like you guys are constantly changing your moral values. So should we align with what you said 20 years ago, or what you said 10 years ago, or what you're going to say in 10 years or in 20 years? So that's the irony of it. When someone's coming with an absolute value system like Islam is, and saying these are absolute, objective, universal moral values that have been decreed by God, and they're saying, well, we as as human beings, we as secular liberals, we've come up and we've discovered that all of that stuff is unjust, and we've now arrived at this conclusion that this is okay. And then the question becomes, well, what's to say that you're not going to change your mind again in 10 years, right? Right now, you believe that a relationship with a corpse, or a relationship with an animal, or a relationship with your mom or your dad, through incest, you're saying that that's still off limits. That's still that's gross, right? But in 10 years, in 20 years, the trajectory looks like you probably will say all of those things are okay, right? There's as long as it's between two consensual people, or consensual beings, not even people anymore. What's wrong with that? You say that as no one's being forced into it. So that's kind of the way the morality is leaning towards. So yeah, it's definitely contradictory to say that we're constantly in flux, we're constantly changing, but today you better agree with us, otherwise you're immoral. And if you hold on to what we believed 10 years ago, then you're immoral. And then it's like, well, what about 10 years from now? What if your position changes and you say to what we believed 10 years ago was immoral and we're supposed to adjust to you? Something's not right about that. And I think people should just open their eyes, zoom the camera out a little bit to understand their own perspective.
My last question is that for a Muslim who is queer, or who has homosexual thoughts, or who is not the same as other Muslim people who are heterosexual, what is your advice to these Muslim people? Because apparently that it does exist, and they're trying to find the truth. I mean, what is the truth for these people?
Okay, so I mean, we should call this we should differentiate between same-sex attraction and homosexuality, right? So if we use these terms, these are better terms. Someone who has same-sex attraction, right? People struggle with that, and they have that, and they may not understand why they have that. Nobody seems to understand exactly why they have it. The best scientists say we don't know why that exists. There is no gay gene that's been proven, right? It's no one says that for sure you're created like this. We don't know any of this stuff for sure. What we do know is that, number one, Allah's not going to hold you accountable for your feelings, right? He's going to hold you accountable for your actions. And number two, not all of your feelings and your desires are automatically moral, right? You may be attracted to your best friend's wife, just because you have a natural attraction to her doesn't mean you're allowed to have a relationship with her, right? Even if you're in love with her, doesn't mean that she's okay and there's something healthy and okay with that. You may be attracted to your mother or your sister naturally. That doesn't mean that having a relationship with them is okay, right? So not every single desire is, forget the word natural, right? It doesn't matter whether it's natural or not, or whether it's normal or not. Not every single desire is moral, right? And it's very important for people to understand that. And then lastly, people are, people close themselves and they make same-sex attraction an identity for themselves, and it's not an identity, right? What it is, it's a feeling, and you can potentially try to regulate that feeling. You could try to control that feeling. So I advise people to check out two resources. One of them is a online support group for Muslims who are struggling with same-sex attraction, but they're not progressives. They're not trying to follow Scott Kugel. They're not trying to reinterpret or change the religion of Islam. And their group is called straightstruggle.com. And there's another fantastic podcast called Away Beyond the Rainbow by Wahid Jensen. And he's actually a Muslim who has same-sex attraction and he struggles with it. But he's one of those people who says, I'm not gonna try to change the religion. I'm just gonna try to work on myself and curb my desires and see to what extent I can actually help either redirect these desires or keep them in check or keep them in control and understand my condition. And this is my test from Allah. So I think, people should just be open-minded. They should understand that if they're going through one of these tests in life, that try to look for the wisdom behind the test, understand that it is a test from Allah, and other people get tested with different things. So this is your test, and be wise about it. Don't try to change the religion of Allah. Use the religion of Allah as it is to help you through that test and that difficulty.
Two things I want to address. First thing, I don't know if we addressed it in the video and they just cut it out, or if we just didn't say anything at all. But I noticed when rewatching the video, when Natalie stepped up, she said, "Yeah, I agree that men and women can have four wives." I can't remember if I was focusing on something else or if I didn't just catch that because when I look at the video, it doesn't look like I caught it, right? I think I was thinking about something, so I must have missed it because I definitely would have said something. I feel like, um, but yeah, obviously we don't believe that women can have four husbands. I think Mahmoud addressed it in the video. We said that only men can have four wives, and that's for many different reasons. So that's one of the things I wanted to address. The other thing was I said that is like a man must get permission from his wife to have another wife, right? That's incorrect. It's up to the man to make that decision, and the wife might not be happy with the decision, and that may lead to some argument or something like that. But yeah, it let them know how you feel. As long as it's not in the contract or anything, then yeah. Yeah, if the woman wants to put it in the contract beforehand, then it would become something that the woman can't do.
If you look at every other religion, that's a sin in every religion.
Yeah, I wanted to say something prior. When I was if you the rest of that clip of the when me and Natalie kind of go at it a little bit, um, every time I'm about to address something or if I'm about to say something, she will cut me off, right? It was a little bit frustrating. And then I'm not able to get my point out in that moment. I was a little bit annoying. And just because especially we had respect the whole time, right? We were allowing her to speak fully and everything that she wanted to say, we allowed her to get across. But I know this was a little bit of a sensitive subject for her. So when she was speaking this matter, whenever I was trying to rebuttal or something like that, it was a little bit difficult for me to get it out, right? Because she would cut me off, and then it would be passed on to another person if I tried talking again, right? So I wasn't able to fully get my point across in that situation, but I think alhamdulillah now I was able to. So yeah, I just wanted to address that.